Welcome to Mind Bending Monday. Thank you so much for joining us. We are happy to have you. Last week, we explored how to use Venn diagrams to support algebra. This week, we're going to look at another two-circle Venn diagram, but with a twist. So if your students needed a little more of a challenge, they're going to get it this week. Are you ready? Let's get started. Perplexing Logic Puzzles Using Venn Diagrams, Episode 2, Two-Circle Venn Diagrams with Systems of Equations. Last episode, we discussed the value of Venn diagrams, and we've also done a series on visual Venn diagrams. So if you haven't seen those, you might want to go back and look at those first. Here are some of the objectives that will be incorporated into these puzzles for both elementary and middle school students. What's new in this episode? I am so excited to introduce this. In episode 1, when students interpreted all of the clues correctly, then they were finished with the problem. But in this episode, that is not the case. Students can interpret all the clues correctly, and when they're finished, they still don't have a solution. So they'll have to figure out that in middle school, they'll figure out, okay, which two equations are part of a system and how do I solve that system? And once they do that, then they can solve the rest of the puzzle. In elementary school, they'll use alternate strategies. We are not going to go over everything we've already done. We're going to pick up and go fairly quickly, but this is exciting. Are you ready? Let's get started. This puzzle is a survey about spring break. And as students read the question, they'll determine that there are two categories because there are two questions. So very quickly, as we discussed last episode, they'll move to a Venn diagram. So the two attributes or the two questions are, did you play board games or card games, or did you go to a park? So let's look at the clues, and let's use one of the strategies that we discussed last week, the use of color, to interpret the clues. 60 people played board or card games. Well, if students didn't remember this right away, they'll see that they need to label their categories. So let's go ahead and do that so that we can write equations with the clues. Okay, so clue 1, now let's go back. 60 people played board or card games. So the equation would be A plus B equals 60. Let's look at the next clue. 49 people did one and only one of those activities. So the sections that are in one and only one circle are A plus C, or A and C. So A plus C is 49. I am going through this very quickly. So if you want suggestions on questioning and ways to introduce these clues, remember, please go back to episode 1. We have lots of ideas for you there. 25 people did not go to a park. So that would be categories A and D. So A plus D equals 25. From experience, a lot of students will miss the D. So if they do that, one question, and we talked about this last time, but it's a common misconception, is to say what is inside the park. So is A the only thing that's not included? And just have them really think about that instead of just telling them. Okay, let's go to the next clue. Last but not least, the number of people who went to a park but did not play games is 2 less than twice the number of people who played games but did not go to a park. This is a little more challenging, so I'll share with you some strategies that I use to help students write this equation. First, we underline the different sections. So the number of people who went to a park but did not play games. So let's think about that. That would be category C. People in C went to a park but did not play games. Now let's skip the is 2 less than twice for right now. And let's come to this. The number of people who played games but did not go to a park. A. How can you help students who are really struggling with this concept of how to write this equation? Well, let's talk about an idea. For that, let's go to a new page. I've seen enough students on both an elementary and a middle school level who struggle with this that I think it's worth taking a few minutes to talk about questioning. But if your students are really proficient at writing equations, you can just fast forward through this section. So let's look at what we have. And one of the things that I always encourage students to do is write what you know with words. So C is 2 less than twice A. Now, what do you do from there? Well, I'm not a fan of keywords, and you know the research on it, but is not really a keyword that says that this is the same amount as all of this. So I know that C is going to be equal to all of this. But the key then is how to write this. And if you've taught this for a long time, you know that the tendency is for them to write 2 minus 2A. And students get a little stuck because they tend to do things in the order in which they're written. So one of the things I do is just cover this up and say, okay, what is twice 10? What is twice 15? And as students tell me the answers to that, I'm like, okay, let me ask you this. What is 2 less than twice 5? What is 2 less than twice 10? And I give them pretty easy numbers to multiply because that's not the goal right now. And they all do it mentally. They all know what to do. So give them 10 of those. Make it pretty easy until they've done it enough that it's just second nature. And then say, okay, what did you do first? When you said 10 less or 2 less than twice 5, what did you do first? And have them talk through it, because what they'll say is, well, I multiplied 5 times 2 and then I subtracted 2. And then say, well, okay, did you say 2 minus 10? Your answer wasn't -8. So let them think through that process and then have them think about how to write it. So you can't take something away from something you don't have. So you've got to figure out what this is first. So twice A is 2A. And then to take 2 away from that would be -2. So when you talk through that, it really does help. I've seen that really turn on some light bulbs. Okay, so let's come back to this. So now we know that C equals 2A minus 2. Okay, so now I have all my equations. And I don't have any numbers in my puzzle. Okay, what should I do next? Let's give students some time to think. And then what would you do next? Let's talk about it. Let's give ourselves some room to work and think about what we want to do next. If you teach middle school and systems of equations, you might want to skip this part because your students will probably pretty easily see which 2 equations to use and will have a different method for solving them. But let's look at how we might approach this with students who do not have a background with this. If you look at each equation, so let's look at this first one, A plus B. Even though we are talking about people, so we know that they will be whole numbers, we still have so many possibilities and no way to narrow it down. So one of the things that you want students to see is that all of these have so many different possibilities. And so does this. But what do you see that might help you? And what you want students to realize is that these two equations are missing the same two pieces of information. So even though there are a lot of possibilities, when you know something else about it, that narrows it down. If you know about Singapore method of problem solving, and we'll do some more videos on that later, there's a pretty simple way to solve this without guess and check. But your students can also make a guess and check table and figure out what the solution would be. But let's look at it just as a preview using Singapore method of problem solving. What do you know? You know you have two letters, A and C. And you know C is related to A. So A will be your mystery box. And then C is 2A minus 2. And together they are 49. Now we're in the process now of developing some webinars on this. So if you don't know this strategy, I think you'll love it. But let's look. So what do I know from this picture? I know that 3 boxes minus 2 is equal to 49. And even if your students are in elementary school and not solving one-step equations, they can pretty easily see what number would this have to equal to make this sentence true. So even though they're not maybe adding 2 to both sides, they would still be able to see that 3 boxes, those 3 boxes have a total of 51. So 1 box would be 17. And then you just fill in the boxes. And then when you look at those numbers, you can see that A is equal to 17 and C is equal to 32. That is so much easier. So now let's go back to our diagram. Now that we know that A is equal to 17 and C is equal to 32, that really helps us complete the rest of our diagram. So I can say A is 17. So I can put that in this equation. And then I know that B is 43. I can put A is 17 into this equation, and I know that D is 8. That is so helpful. Now I can easily use this information to answer the questions. How many people were surveyed? If I find the sum of all of these numbers, I know that 100 people were surveyed. And I can look at how many people did not play games or go to a park. That would be D. So the answer to that is 8. So if you're in elementary school, woohoo, you've solved it. And if you're in middle school, you will want to use this information to create your two-way frequency table. And we discussed that last week, but here it is. And a relative frequency table, which in this case is really easy since it's 100 people. And I've also included some questions for you to use in middle school on percentages and probability and random samples. So I hope that that is really helpful. I hope you enjoyed this puzzle and that your students will really benefit from it. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you. So much so that we are giving away free prizes every month. And in April, your free prize is going to be Venn diagram puzzles. So we hope you'll use one of these ways to enter. Also, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. We don't want you to miss a single episode of Mind Bending Monday. Thanks again for your time, and we look forward to seeing you next Monday. Have a great week.